Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the 12th video session from the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance during this pandemic period. My name is Dan Hurley, and I am chair-elect and a director with the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. I'm also principal and co-founder of the Hurley Martin Group, a public relations and community engagement firm based here on Gabriola Island. I want to acknowledge first that we're on the Coast Salish, Nuu-Chaalut, and Kwakiutl traditional territories, and we acknowledge our partnership with the peoples whose traditional lands these are. I also want to give thanks to Douglas Magazine for being our sponsor for today's session. This video session is part of VIEA's mission to unite and connect decision makers and to inform and add to the conversation on economic vitality for the Vancouver Island and Gulf Islands region. Over the last several weeks, we have hosted a number of speakers on a wide range of topics on how we can support one another during the current pandemic and along the road to recovery. Today, we are pleased to have Cynthia Lockrey of Lockrey Communications with us. She's based in the Cowichan Valley. Her presentation will focus on how we use storytelling to connect our customers and our audiences through social media, emails, and presentations. But before we begin, a few details on the format of our session. Cynthia's presentation will last about 10 minutes, followed by about 15 minutes of questions and answers. You will find the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Please enter your question in there, and I'll do my best to get to your question in the time that we have. If we don't get to your question today or if something comes up after the session, you can contact our president, George Hansen, at george@viea.ca. We ask everyone to make sure that you keep your mutes on and your videos off during the presentation so we don't disturb the flow of our conversation. So now I'd like to turn things over to Cynthia. Cynthia, welcome to the VIEA Zoom room.
Thank you. All right. So I am going to take what is usually an hour presentation or 3-hour workshop into 10 minutes. So we're going to talk about why storytelling is important, elements of a story, really getting clear on who you're talking to, key messaging, the role of facts and emotions, and a call to action. So we know that storytelling is the oldest form of communications that we have. Throughout history, people have used stories through oral, visual, written to communicate. And why is that? Because our brains retain 2 to 10 times more information when we hear it in a story. So when we look at stories, we are actually hardwired our brains to process information. So when you hear a story that really gets you upset, really gets you angry, makes you want to do something, it's because your brain is releasing cortisol when it's hearing it. And that helps you pay attention and retain information. When you hear a story that tugs on your heartstrings, really gets you feeling emotionally involved, it's because your brain's releasing oxytocin, which gives you trust, empathy, and generosity. During COVID-19, what is it that sticks with you? It's the stories that you're hearing. So when we have those stories coming and our brains releasing these chemicals, those help us process all the information that we hear in a day and remember key points. One of the big things with the memory is anything that can put the listener into your shoes. You know, I was running out the door and the dogs were barking and the phone was ringing and I just had to get to this meeting. And when sure enough, I hit every red light on the way there. These are triggers, these are pieces that people can put themselves instead of, I was running late to a meeting and this happened. So here's some of the elements of any story that people resonate with. Human interest, we're hearing a lot of that right now with COVID. Heartstrings, adversity, conflict, resolution, children. If you have a story that involves an animal, you already have a winner because everybody remembers animal stories. Pre-COVID-19, the #1 issue in Canada was the environment and people helping people. Here's what storytelling is not. It's not about your programs, your products, your services, corporate speak. It's not about you and your needs. Yes, you can still talk about your products. Yes, you can still talk about your services, but you've got to figure out how that helps people. So it's about talking with your audience, not to them. Nobody wants to be talked to. So here's some quick pieces to create your stories. You always start with who you're talking to. A lot of times people start with what they want to tell you, but it's who is it you're talking to. If you're talking to a broad group, there's no such audience as taxpayers. That's too broad. Even women ages 30 to 50 is too broad. So really narrow down and try to see your audience as a human being who's sitting across from the table or right now on Zoom with you. Their age, their gender, all this details. So here's the key thing. It's not about you. It's about looking and narrowing down your audience. Betty, who's 55, who's a teacher, who has 2 kids, who's passionate about the environment. What is it that your audience cares about? How do they connect to the story? Not how do you want them to, but how do they naturally? And most importantly, why should they care about what you're saying? So when I talk about storytelling, a lot of you use it every day when you're having dinner, when you're going to book club, in your social life. Think of those pre-COVID family dinners where you've got that crazy uncle who always has a story to tell. But when we look at it from our business life, we sometimes put up this wall and forget about using stories. So if you have a broad audience and you don't know their background, then you assume it's grade 6 because that's the average reading level in Canada today. Not because of just literacy, but how we process information. We want these quick hits. Where do they go to get information? Are they on social media a lot, from their peers, from websites? And if you know how they go to get information, it will give you clues on how you need to tell your story. The YouTube generation wants things quick and entertaining. What's their primary language? So we want to look, and we're going to look more into details about framing your story in a way that they can make a personal connection with. So if you remember nothing from today, this is usually the one thing that sticks out for people when I talk about storytelling is there are only 3 things that people can remember. So you have to be focused. Now, I would say during COVID-19, I would narrow it to 1 or 2. So if we're done talking and you only remember 1 to 2 things, what is it? So that when you're telling your stories, maybe you break it up into multiple stories so you can talk about different pieces. And make sure they're relevant to your audience. And when you create these key messages that we call in communications, they're the 3 points you want people to remember. So when you're doing a social media post, they're on there. When you're doing a presentation, they're in there. Anywhere you talk about this topic. In your stories, it's all about emotion. There are no stories that don't have emotion. Right now with COVID-19, every story that really grabs attention is about emotions. The stories that you're telling to your friends and family right now about your experience has emotions. So you have to make sure that the emotions are included. Sometimes it's just stating the emotion. You know what? I just get really depressed when I think about the fact that I don't even know when I'll see my loved ones again. And making sure that those emotions will help people connect and say, yeah, I get kind of depressed about that too. So for those of you who are like enough about emotions, you also have to have the facts. So when you're looking at the facts, it's not all the information you want to spew. It goes back to who you're talking to. So I just worked with a group of energy leaders in BC, and they're looking at energy reduction campaign. And for them, they wanted to save money. And I said, well, who is it Go to your data. Well, they found out it was students living in dorm rooms for a university that were the biggest energy wasters. So the facts about energy conservation had to be relevant to a 19-year-old, not relevant to the 55-year-old who's trying to get the information. And the emotions and the key points had to be related to that 19-year-old, which is a completely different conversation than talking about energy reduction in a classroom, which would then be the professor. So this is about zeroing down. You might have a broad message you're trying to get across, but for each audience, you might have different slices that you're going to focus on, because you need to make it specific action that people can relate to. It can't be somebody else's problem. You'll see a lot of the advocacy that's going on right now in COVID-19 aren't these general advocacies for business or for residents. It's for specific sectors, and they are using stories to show how their sectors impacted. So by zeroing down and really talking about, for example, restaurateurs have a completely different situation than the bookstore owner, who has different opportunities. So you want to make it real to them with real action. Now, this is the key piece. So you've told this story. You've thought, okay, I want to talk to this audience. And the key point that I want to get across is how to access this service or about my product. And so I got to think of what are the emotions, what are the facts, and zero in, and you've created the story. Right now, all of you on this Zoom have tuned me out at least 7 times. You have checked your emails, your dog has barked, your kids have walked by. So when you end your story, you have to end with a call to action. You have to tell people what you want them to do with the information. Don't let me come up with my own conclusions, because I'm going to do it based on my bias, my interest. So be as specific as possible. So Dan, I don't know if I did it. So the stories, this is what, if you want to change your world, if you want people to actually act on something, you will have it much better if you take the information you're trying to share and convey it in a story. So here's a bit about me, of how to keep in touch with me.
Well, thank you very much, Cynthia. That was a great overview in 10 minutes. You covered an entire subject in 10 minutes. So I think you did done a great job. I'm curious, just to start off, about when you're connecting with your audiences. Have you given some thought in terms of the kinds of examples that you've seen maybe here on Vancouver Island or with some of your clients where the storytelling is really making a significant impact?
Absolutely. I yesterday needed to order some books for my daughter from the local bookstore, Volume 1. I'll give them a plug. And, you know, I don't go to Amazon. I go to the local. And she said to me, well, even if you called Amazon, it's a 2-month wait because we're so behind. But with us, we can get it to you that day. And I said to her, that is a piece of communications, because shop local is a concept that the people who shop local, but the people who shop online, they're conditioned to do that. So it has to be, what's in it for me? Well, what's in it for me is I can get my needs met immediately by buying the books locally instead of waiting a month. So I said, use that as a way of telling stories.
Yeah, excellent, excellent case. We have a question here. So a reminder, if you've got a question for Cynthia or an idea or a good example, please put it in the chat at the bottom of your screen. So first question, can you maybe give a suggestion on how someone can write or show emotion when they're writing from the organization's page and can't use the I or we, or can we use I or we in these examples? So how would you do that as an organization to show emotion?
I'm doing it just this morning for a client that's an organization, and especially now, you should be using we. You shouldn't be a talking head. you should have some of that empathy. So you can say we appreciate the stress that people are under right now, and you can use that. I think it's really rough and it seems very abrupt if you try to use too much corporate speak in the current environment. And I think if you're fighting your leader on using we, you're actually would be tone deaf if you tried to be too corporate. Now's the time to take those walls down.
So the next question is there a difference between personal stories and stories you've heard re acceptance and impact?
Every story, you have to look at who it is that's going to connect with it the most. And you have to really think about having that person across the table with you and telling it to a human being, and that is where the personal will come out. But you want to see, how do I tell this that's got an impact that not just this one human being's going to relate to, but people in that segment.
A good example, you had mentioned to me earlier of your involvement with Cowichan Strong group. Mm-hmm. Is there an example in coming together as a community like that where you've seen some real success in terms of that movement and how storytelling is helping move forward?
Absolutely. So a good example is there's the chamber, the broader chamber, I think it's BC Chamber, has a survey out there. And the general scope is, hey, everybody, can you answer the survey? And I said, no, we need to bring it back down to why people in Cowichan need to do the survey. So it's a provincial survey. And so bringing it back home, you know what? If we can have 80 respondents, then we will get our Cowichan data out of the survey, but we need a minimum of 80. And why is that important? Because if we're going to make Made in Cowichan recovery for Cowichan, we need Cowichan data. So helping people understand, and surveys is a great example. Right now, we're working on yet another survey. And I said to the group just before this call, we have to tell people why they need to take 5 to 10 minutes to fill out this survey versus the other 20 surveys in their inbox, and how it's going to help Cowichan specifically recover and why it's important, instead of here is a survey to fill out, and tell the story.
So this is the next question is sort of related to that. So when you're communicating to a large group that crosses many different sectors, so your Cowichan group is probably an example of that, the commonality being community. But how do you do that to different sectors like age, gender, and perhaps to staff? You talked a little bit about that in your presentation, but maybe you can explore that a little bit more.
Ideally, you would take the information that you're conveying and break it out into audiences. So you may have a broad amount of information, but when you're writing an email to staff, you give it a twist that's specifically to staff, and you make sure that they identify with it. Then you're doing it to community, but the business community is going to have a different take on it than your homeowners. So recognizing, and the thing is, if I see myself in it, I'm more likely to tune in. The biggest mistake large organizations make, I mean large, they have multiple stakeholders, is they think one message, we got to hit everybody. What happens is nobody tunes in because they don't see themselves in the message.
So you spoke about this again in the presentation, but what is the optimum number of messages or slides, for example, in a presentation to get your message across?
So what I would do if I was doing a presentation is say, you know what, today I want to focus on 3 things. And I want to talk about health and safety. I want to talk about and have your themes and and in a crisis, I would do 1 or 2, because I don't know about you, but I'm an information overload right now, trying to keep track of everything. And if you want me to actually connect with and understand what you're saying, it might just be 1. You know what, today I just want to talk about health and safety. Nothing is more important right now than health and safety. And I want to tell you a story about health and safety. of how PPE shortage has had an impact on it. Like, so bring it right down.
So if you're, and all of us, I'm sure, have been involved with developing a document, we're putting together a message to our employees, to our stakeholders, to when we go to put together newsletters, or even documents that go to funders or governments. How would you incorporate storytelling in that? Is that a case where you put the story first and then get to the point? Or what are some strategies around how you can incorporate storytelling in those sorts of documents?
So if you're doing a newsletter, it should always have some sort of storytelling. And your website is your mothership. And so your website is a great place to showcase a story, whether it be a video, which is the best way because we know people receive videos, or a short little case study type story. And you can embed links into it and say, you know what, or you can give a teaser. You know, we rolled out this program and Betty, the donut shop owner, already saw a 10% increase in her sales in a week because of this, which allowed Betty to not only have money in her pocket, but also bring back one staff member, which is one less person unemployed in our community. And then you can embed a link to the story that's on your website. Humans of New York, if you're not on Humans of New York on Facebook, I encourage you to look at it. They do an amazing job with storytelling in a very short amount of time. It doesn't need to be elaborate.
So on that point, just with respect to video, what are some tips to do an effective video that you could put on your webpage or Facebook page or what have you?
Okay, so with video, you have 10 seconds to grab my attention, and then I'm out. So if you start with, hi, it's Cynthia. I'm here today to talk about, I'm out, done, you've lost me. So have you had to lay off staff due to COVID-19 and these staff are your family and you know the emotional impacts, like something that the person, you're speaking to the person. So your videos can't be these broad things like, are you one of 200 businesses that have had to like, it's got to be personal right at the beginning. And then, so in video, you want to script the first 10 seconds to 15 of something that's going to grab me. And then you can ad lib the middle. And at the end, you want to script it and not, thanks for watching, have a good day. That call to action at the end. You know what? If you want to learn more about funding, go to this website or write your MLA or whatever the call to action is. Don't just drop it. And so video, 2 minutes is about it. So you got 15 seconds, you script at the beginning, 15 at the end, and you kind of wing it, but still knowing your audience and your key points.
Great points.
Point for a video is enough.
Yes. And everyone has a camera now. Everyone can be a videographer, but it's these techniques that make you from anybody to a really effective communicator. Mm-hmm. So just a reminder, we have a few minutes left. So if you have a question or comment or a good example, put it in the chat and we will share that. So Cynthia, as we think about the weeks ahead and as we look at British Columbia looking at starting to open up the economy as of tomorrow. So today is May 5th, Tuesday, May 5th. So tomorrow, May 6th, is when we'll get more details about what that's going to look like. What are some things that people need to be thinking about in terms of how they're communicating, in addition to what you've provided here today?
I really want you to think about who it is you're talking to and how it matters to them. But in a crisis, I've been working with quite a few clients on crisis. You always have to start with empathy as your first point and gratitude. So people want to feel that you understand their situation and that you're grateful for whatever they're going through before you can start dumping information. So if you just start dumping in information because you want to tell them this and you want to get this across, it can be a barrier. But if you start with the personal, you know what, if you're talking to your staff, I know these have been a challenging 6 weeks for you, as many of you are juggling parents, homeschooling parents, kids, and having elderly parents, plus the demands of the job. And we appreciate that you have still been coming in and giving it your all, and then you give information. So make sure people feel seen and heard.
Yeah, it's almost the first thing you need to think about before you even start to plan out that memo or start talking. Is just where can I? And it takes some time. It takes time. It's a change in terms of the way that you present information. But once you do that, it makes such an impact in terms of the response and in terms of how you get buy-in, and then all the other networks you work through.
And I've been doing it with my clients. As soon as I have any piece of information, I think, where's the empathy? Where's the gratitude? For those of you who follow Brene Brown, and for those of you who don't, this is the time to be vulnerable and to have the empathy, and it will gain you so much traction with people versus pretending it's business as usual and being corporate. That is the best way to lose people.
Yeah, the meaning of corporate is going to change after all this. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like, but it just goes back to these terms are going to change. All these terms are going to change in the way we do things.
Well, look at us right now. We're both in our homes and you're seeing a different side. It's not as polished, right? But that's the new normal. So if and we talk about being tone deaf a lot in marketing and communications, if you're not meeting people where they are, there's no way that they're going to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah. So a couple more questions before we wrap up. So someone has a specific question around background colors to use in presentation. What evokes the audience's attention?
Don't be busy. Just really try to be as simple as possible. When I do presentations, I try to put some pictures in there because I personally can't just stare at text. So when you're doing that, you want to make sure, and it's calming. Like, let's avoid the reds right now. Let's avoid the screaming at you colors. So try to be a bit more calming as well. And when you are like we are on having your background with you, I always try to have a quite static background so there's not a lot of activity happening behind me. But really think of what invokes calm, and you don't want people distracted by what's happening in your presentation or in your Zoom background.
So this will be the final question here, and it has to do with authenticity and being genuine. How do you think statements, like honest statements, like "thank you for sharing that," it has sort of become a cliche over time. How do you think our wording will change after this?
I think you have to think of what would you want to hear, and think about when you're having human conversations with your family, with your friends. Do they say, "Thank you for sharing"? They say, "You know what? I'm so grateful that you brought that up because I'm struggling with that as well." Or, "Oh, it's so good to feel I'm not alone." Or, "I bet you that's something that a lot of people are having challenges with."
Well, Cynthia, that's a great way to leave on, and we really appreciate your time and your advice during this period, and hopefully we can stay in touch. Just a reminder where people can reach you if they have further questions.
Yeah, go to Lockrey Communications, or if you want to learn more at howtocommunications.com. I actually write a lot of blogs on there, and there is a lot of information about storytelling and communicating in a crisis on howtocommunications.com.
Well, I'll be definitely checking that out myself, and I hope others will as well. So thanks, Cynthia, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and today's session has been recorded, so if you want to watch it again or share it with others, please go to VIEA, VIEA.ca. Our next session is this Thursday, May the 5th today's May 5th, May 7th, Thursday, I'm starting to lose track of days, May 7th at 11:30 a.m. And we will have an invited panel of Vancouver Island CPAs, chartered professional accountants, who will join us for guidance on a number of different topics, including how to get the most out of government financial assistance, how to work with your bank to access lending programs, and what you need to know about extended personal and business tax deadlines. So really important information. Please feel free to pass this information on to others. And if you're not already on our mailing list, please go to our mailing list at viea.ca for more information. So until then, please keep good company, and we will see you again soon. Thanks very much.